So for the reading block, we're looking at Nothing Must Announce Itself. Aubrey passed the boundary into the territory of the Iron Dwarves, as she'd sworn to them back when she was still a young girl she would never she never would again. Okay, that's correct. She was still young in years by the standards of creatures like the dwarves, but humans aged faster, and now she was a mother of 3 boys. She made all 3 of her sons promise never to cross this boundary into this portion of the woods not meant for humans. Boys made all sorts of promises and would continue to do so even after they grew into men. It was part of their nature. Many of them meant the promises when they were made, but men were always about testing their boundaries. It was true of her boys and their father as well. They could have moved, of course. Another state, even another town might have been enough. Anything greater than walking distance, really. Move the boundary farther away to avoid temptation and carelessness. Her husband always promised they would move when he got the next promotion, when things at work were more stable, or when he finally made partner. The house was paid off, the schools were good, they had friends here, and 1,000 other excuses. He promised, though. Maybe he even meant it at one time, but now that was all beside the point. Aubrey drew her sword that she had not worn at her side for many years. The world of social media, live streaming, and Wi-Fi. In the world of social media, live streaming, and Wi-Fi, no one should have to wear a sword again. But there was this part of the woods beyond the boundary to still consider. Just because most people had forgotten didn't mean the world of myth had vanished from the earth. Aubrey also swore never to tell the secrets she knew of the dwarves, and this was a promise she'd kept. Yet here she was lifting her sword against the Iron Dwarves instead of with them. All her boys tested their boundaries. Ian more than the rest, but all of them. Connor would ride his bike out to the edge of their driveway and skid to a halt just shy of the lip of the asphalt, the boundary they had set for him, where the white drive turned to black, deadly street, the territory of cars and distracted drivers. As he did it, he'd look over his shoulder for her reaction. Douglas was the toucher. If you told him not to touch a thing, all right, I got at least one typo I got to fix there. If you told him not to touch a thing, he'd immediately reach out with one finger or one toe to touch it one more time. Ian was something different. He'd step right off the edge if she or her husband let go of him long enough to do so. He'd do it without looking for her reaction, without malice. For Ian, it wasn't about testing them. It was about testing the world and testing himself. These qualities might make him into a hell of a man one day, if she could keep him alive that long. He was a sweet boy most of the time, but even sweet boys could drown, fall to their deaths, or be captured by Iron Dwarves if they stepped across the wrong line at the wrong time. Right now, she'd prefer he was playing in the street. A voice like a growl cried out at Aubrey, and she fought the urge to raise her sword. That would be involving a conflict she was unlikely to win. But she had brought and drawn her sword in their territory anyway, hadn't she? It took her a moment to process the words in a language no other human knew. By the time she translated in her head the warning to halt, they were already shouting more things at her. Fortunately, she had frozen in place the moment they addressed her. It sounded like a large party of dwarves, maybe a hunting party, too large to be a common patrol or scouting party. They were expecting her, and she should have expected Ian, her youngest, to create this very problem eventually. Those schools were so damn good, though, weren't they? She finally cried in their tongue out. She finally cried in their tongue out over their growling voices. She knew it well enough, but languages were a degrading skill. Like swordplay, she had neglected her training for many years. I can't hear you if you all speak at once. The growling cut off, so maybe her clumsy and rusty use of their ancient words had gotten the message across. That was a start, at least. We are the Firum, one said, still in their language. I know you are, and I respect that. If you respected it, you wouldn't be here. You know I had to be. You would go after one of your young if they strayed from your territory. None of ours stray. She doubted that was true, but it would not serve to accuse them of lying in their own territory. My son was foolish, and I am ashamed he violated your territory, but nothing will be served by not returning him to me. Boundaries only matter insofar as they are enforced. And what does that mean for my son? You will kill him? Have you already? Her voice shook a little on that last question, but she continued with her sword down by her side. You will keep him a slave in your minds? Slavery is a human invention, Aubrey, mother of men. We are old enough to remember when humans held us in chains, in the chains we were forced to forge for them. Even if your kind have forgotten those days, humans would make poor slaves, would eat more than their share, and would give us more work fixing their errors. Voices just out of her sight on all sides had grumbled their agreement. She walked right into the circle of their trap. It was little comfort that she'd fully intended to do so. It took her a moment to piece together all this monologue thrown at her, but then she said, returning him and allowing him to learn from his mistake would serve us both then. If humans learned, we wouldn't be here talking now. You're not dealing with all humans, it's just me and you, and I've kept your secrets for all these years. Years are longer things for my kind. They pass harder for us. If you kept your vows, we would not be here now. They seem to be repeating the same singular idea. Their language and culture were built around repetition. They were the Firum. Yet we are, and I'm not leaving without Ian. Then you're not leaving. The dwarves showed themselves. They were shorter than humans, but broad and stocky, like how she would imagine Neanderthals, being thick with muscle all the way through. She'd wondered more than once over the years if archaeologists had actually stumbled upon the remains of iron dwarves and confused them for another human species, back when the Firum were more plentiful. She was short herself and not much taller than them, as they stood just under 5 feet. Their armor and weapons were all black iron, so dark as to lose the fine detail of their craftsmanship under her human eyes. Humans built things to break, and they just ordered a new one off Amazon. Dwarves lived expanses of years and expected their few possessions to last. Their gray skin obscured pitch-black eyes set deep into their wrinkled faces. Shaggy black and gray hair hung around the heads of those without helmets. All had beards that scraggled over their chest plates. Their dark upon dark features reminded her of staring into the eyes of gorillas. Probably these ancient warriors were comparable in strength to gorillas or chimpanzees. Hopefully they would be easier to reason with. She still did not lift her sword, but kept her grip upon it. The one in front was a dwarf she didn't recognize. Okay, got a little typo there to fix. The ones she knew in her childhood were surely still alive, but they were not out here to greet her return. No invitations, no announcements, no celebration. He spoke to her in English. There is no compromise on this, Aubrey, mother of men. No compromise either, it seemed. The title he addressed her with was less of an insult in English. The venom dwarves felt toward men was lost in translation, but not in tone. All right. You have to let me take him back, she said in the language of the Firum again. One translation for Firum in their tongue was unyielding. That was unfortunately what she feared she was dealing with now. Use your own language, the leader said in modern English. You are butchering ours. Aubrey smiled a bit at that despite the situations. She switched back to English. It is in your best interest to allow me the mercy and the grace to leave with my impetuous son. You are not in a position to threaten us. I wouldn't dream to do so. I only brought my sword to show that I respect your power, she said. But the threat comes from the outside. In the modern human world, the disappearance of a child cannot go unnoticed. People will search, not just my family. Authorities will search until they find evidence of what happened. We understand the threat humans pose, Aubrey. With all respect and honor, I don't think you do, not fully. She took a breath and pressed her point. Humans will use flying machines. They'll use devices with eyes that see through ground and identify heat, such as what must come from your furnaces, no matter how deep in the earth they might go. When children disappear, strangers will line up shoulder to shoulder and walk through the woods, covering every square inch of ground. They might miss your entrances, but they will sweep the area again and again. The only way to avoid this discovery is for me to take the boy back home so they have no interest in searching your territory. Even if I made up a story to explain him being gone, they would think I killed him myself, and they would search for the body to prove my guilt. A long silence followed. A few whispers in languages older than even the one Aubrey knew hissed in heated debate all around her. Finally, he spoke in English again. We are amazed that humans combine kindness and contempt in such deep levels of contradiction. You will never stop being a threat to us and to this world as you spread across it like a plague. I have no desire to be here, she said, but the only solution is to have me leave with him and use the fear of this day to make him never cross your border again. It is the only option. Your people understand when the truth of a thing won't yield. Follow us. She walked in their midst, down winding and narrowing trails. She sheathed her sword, although the dwarves around her showed no concern either way. As the sky grew darker, they reached a cave emitting heat, and they descended. The stink in the air wasn't exactly sulfur, but the burnt mineral combination was close, and it irritated her lungs. It was not entirely dark, but the light sources were low, with wide spaces between. The sloping passage gave way to stone steps, and Aubrey took with care. The steps were placed too wide for her comfort, and at the same time too shallow. They were not meant for her feet. The stone steps gave way to deeper iron stairs that were bolted into the stone walls of a chasm, and weaved their way down through treacherous twists and turns of rocky outcroppings. Deeper and deeper they went until Aubrey thought she could not breathe the growing heat any longer. She had been here before, but never this deep. It occurred to her that the unyielding iron dwarves had not actually promised to give her son back, nor to let her go. She decided that if this were her fate, she would fight and die rather than yield. The Firum would bleed dark and thick, but they'd still bleed. From the glow of furnaces, she saw her son huddled in a corner, with no one really watching him. Where was he to go? Knowing Ian, anything was possible. Metal on metal crashes bounced loudly off the hard walls, coated with millennia of grease and soot particles. Sections of wall and ceiling shimmered smooth with reflected light from the furnaces below. They were all ebony dark, though, all iron dark everywhere. Ian jumped up and ran into his mother's arms. He slammed into her hard enough to hurt her guts and knocked the wind from her stressed lungs. None of the dwarves moved to stop him. He cried and shivered in the dark heat. His clothes were black with soot, and he was slippery with sweat. "Can he have water?" she asked in her tongue, speaking into her son's dirty hair, holding his quivering body. "He's been given water," one answered. "Can you not smell his urine stink everywhere?" said another. "Like he's been marking his place." "Are we free to go?" Aubrey asked. The leader of the party answered in English, "You have no choice but to leave. You will be escorted from our territory, never to return. There will be no second chances, no matter the consequences. This is unyielding, Aubrey, mother of men." This last title was given in their tongue. It just didn't have the same kick in English. 3 of the dwarves circled her and her son, who clutched at her side. "He must wear a hood. We don't trust him not to return." Ian cried and cried, begging for his mother to not let them put the hood over his head again. Nothing she said calmed him, so she slapped him hard across the face to silence his hysteria. His body locked up stiff until only his lips quivered and his eyes leaked from their red rims. He made no more sound even in his sorrow. "You should have obeyed," she said into his face. "If nothing else, you should have obeyed this. If you do it again, I won't be able to save you. You need to believe that. You need to lock that in your head in a place where you'll never forget it, ever. Now put on the hood so we can go home." A dwarf covered Ian's head, and they walked up and out of the mines. It was tiring, and they had to stop more than once. The woods felt cold in comparison to those dark passages. The not quite sulphurous stench stuck to their skin, their hair, and their clothes. She believed she could wash it off of them, but the clothes would probably have to be thrown away. It was full night now, and Aubrey prayed that her husband had not called anyone yet. He promised her he wouldn't, but of course he was just a man giving a man's promises. They reached a certain point in trail. All right. Good thing I took some time before I read this, because I'm finding all sorts of things. I hate typos. I wish I was better at not having them. But alas, I am human, and I count on the competency of editors a great deal. They reached a certain point in the trail, and the dwarves stopped. One of them pulled the hood off Ian's head, and without ceremony the trio of warriors left in silence. Ian's head hung in broken defeat. No more tears nor trembling lips. He just swayed on his feet with exhaustion. Aubrey lifted her youngest son in her arms and carried him slowly home. He was a little too big for that, but he looked so much smaller to her in that moment. She was exhausted too, and focused on not falling over in the dark. As she cried quietly with her son in her arms, she steadied her voice as much as she could. "You'll have to take a bath and go to bed. You're grounded, of course. We'll need to talk about this in the morning." She hoped this experience would be enough to keep him away from the deadly edge, but she knew her son. She feared it was not in his nature to stay away from boundaries. She could not keep her hand on him forever. She feared in her heart that he would remain unyielding.